The coffee cup was halfway to his mouth when he heard it. Two cashiers standing close together near the espresso machine, voices low but not low enough. One of them nodded toward the far end of the counter, where a young woman was quietly restocking cups, her back turned, completely unaware that anyone was talking about her. "She left another note in the suggestion box," the first cashier said. A short laugh followed, like anyone reads those. The second one leaned in. "Did you hear Marcus took credit for the harvest blend again? Third time, and she just lets it happen, every single time." A pause. "That's what she gets for being too nice. Nobody respects nice. She's here at 5 every morning, closes twice a week, every holiday, every weekend." Another pause, quieter this time, almost uncomfortable. "And she still can't get a shift that doesn't destroy her." The first one shrugged. "I honestly feel bad for her, but what's she gonna do? She needs this job." They moved away, laughing softly about something else entirely. Jack Thompson did not move. He sat completely still in the corner booth, coffee cup frozen in midair, both hands wrapped around it. His jaw tightened slowly. His eyes moved from the two cashiers to the young woman at the end of the counter, still restocking cups, still unaware, her shoulders carrying a tiredness that had settled into them so long it had become part of how she stood. Then his eyes moved upward, to the wooden sign above the counter, the one he had chosen himself, the one he had hung with his own hands 19 years ago on the morning this place first opened its doors. "Everyone has a place here." He read it once, then looked back down at his coffee. Rex, the old German shepherd lying at his feet, lifted his head slowly and looked up at him. Those dark amber eyes, steady and patient, reading something in Jack's stillness that no one else in that room could see. Jack reached down and rested his hand on Rex's back. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales, where every story reminds us that the people carrying the most are almost always the ones nobody thinks to ask about. Stay with us. Jack Thompson had never planned to become a businessman. He had planned to serve. For 21 years, he did exactly that. United States Navy. Deployments in places that never appeared on any map his family could find at home. Missions that aged him quietly deep in the bones in ways that didn't show on his face until you looked closely. Through all of it, through every difficult and dangerous stretch of those years, one belief stayed with him like a compass that never drifted. Nobody gets left behind. He carried that belief home to Cedar Falls, Colorado when he retired. He used his savings, took a modest loan, and opened Freedom Grounds Coffee on Main Street with one rule that mattered more to him than any business plan. He wanted people to walk through that door and feel like they belonged. Veterans with nowhere to go in the mornings, elderly folks who needed somewhere warm and familiar, young mothers with strollers and tired eyes, teenagers who just needed a table and a place to breathe. He hung that wooden sign himself on opening morning. The business grew because people believed it. One store became 5, 5 became 15, then 28 locations across Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Jack hired managers, built systems, trusted the people around him to carry the culture forward, while he focused on expansion. And somewhere in the growing distance between Cedar Falls and the corporate office, something had gone quietly wrong. Not loudly, not all at once, just slowly, the way a crack spreads through a wall, until the morning you look up and realize it has been there for years and you never once noticed. The 31 reviews arrived on a rainy Thursday in a thick envelope from headquarters. Jack read them alone at his kitchen table that night, Rex lying across his feet. 22 of the 31 said the same thing in different words. Not about the coffee, not about the food, about the feeling,
about walking through that door and sensing almost immediately that certain people were welcomed and certain people were merely tolerated, and certain people were made to feel, without a single word ever spoken directly to them, that they did not quite belong here. One review read simply, "The coffee was fine, the way they treated me wasn't." Another said, "I felt like they decided I didn't belong before I even spoke." Jack turned those sentences over in his mind for a long time. He did not sleep that night. The following Monday, he left his truck at home. Faded jeans, old jacket, baseball cap pulled low. He took the city bus to the original store, his first store, the one he loved most, with Rex walking quietly beside him on a worn leather leash. What happened at the counter that morning he had not expected to affect him the way it did. He had prepared himself for poor service. He had prepared himself for indifference. What he had not prepared himself for was the specific and particular experience of being made invisible in a place he had built with his own hands and his own savings and his own belief that people deserved better than that. The cashier glanced at him once and turned away. A well-dressed couple walked in behind him. She smiled immediately, warmly, with her whole face. Jack waited 15 seconds, then 20. He ordered quietly. His change landed on the counter instead of his hand. His coffee arrived lukewarm. No one looked him in the eye. He carried his cup to a corner booth and sat down. And then he heard the two cashiers talking about Emily Carter. He went back 3 more times after that. Each visit confirmed what he already knew, but it was Emily who kept drawing his attention. Not because she was loud or demanding or visibly unhappy, because she was none of those things. She arrived before anyone else every morning. She stayed after everyone else every night. She moved through her shifts with a quiet steadiness that never varied regardless of how the day was going, regardless of whether anyone noticed or thanked her or even acknowledged that she was there. Rex noticed her on Jack's second visit. It happened on a slow Wednesday afternoon. Emily was wiping down tables near the window, moving carefully, the kind of exhausted that lives in a person's shoulders and doesn't leave even after sleep. Rex had been lying quietly beside Jack's chair. Then, without any command, without any warning, the old dog simply stood, crossed the café at his own unhurried pace, past managers and supervisors and a group of employees on break, and walked directly to Emily. He pressed his gray-frosted muzzle gently against her leg and stayed there. Emily stopped, looked down. Something shifted in her face. The careful, working smile dropped away, and something far more honest replaced it. She knelt slowly and wrapped both arms around Rex, pressing her face into the warm fur at his neck. Her eyes closed, just for a moment, just long enough. One employee nearby laughed. "Looks like Rex found his favorite." Jack said nothing, just watched. Rex had never once chosen wrong. It took quiet, careful asking before Jack understood the full weight of what Emily Carter had been carrying. 7 years at Freedom Grounds. In that time, she had created 3 of the company's best-selling seasonal drinks, the Harvest Blend, the Winter Vanilla Roast, and a Summer Cold Brew that had driven a 12% sales increase across 6 locations. Her name appeared on none of them. A manager named Marcus Webb had presented each recipe as his own work, and no one above him had ever looked closely enough to question it. She had filed 2 formal complaints about workplace conduct. One had been addressed with a conversation that resolved nothing. The second had never reached human resources at all. A manager had read it and quietly made it disappear. And still, she came in at 5 every morning. 3 years ago, her father had died after a long illness. The medical debt left behind had taken everything her family had saved across decades. Then her mother suffered a stroke, and Emily became overnight both the caregiver and the provider. She cooked meals before her shifts began, managed medications on her lunch breaks, paid bills from a paycheck that was never quite enough, and never complained about it to anyone. Came home after closing shifts to a mother who needed help getting settled for the night. Nobody at work knew any of this. Nobody had ever asked. Among the 31 reviews, one name stayed with Jack longer than any other. Walter Hayes, 81 years old, retired firefighter. He had come to the original Freedom Grounds every single Tuesday for 6 years without missing once. Then, 8 months ago, he had simply stopped coming. Jack called him personally. Walter was quiet for a moment before answering. "I didn't want to make a fuss," he said finally. "That's not how I was raised." Jack told him gently that he just wanted to understand. Another pause, longer this time. The young folks there, I could feel it when I walked in, the way they'd look at me, like I was taking up a table someone more important could use. His voice was steady and careful, the way a man speaks when he has spent a long time practicing keeping emotion at a distance. Eleanor and I used to go every Tuesday morning, vanilla latte for her, black coffee for me. We did that for years. He stopped briefly. She passed 2 winters ago. Jack said nothing, just listened. After she was gone, I kept going because it still felt close to her somehow. Like if I sat in the same seat and ordered the same coffee, she might just walk through that door. A long, quiet breath. But then, one morning, I realized nobody there knew my name. Nobody noticed when I arrived or when I left. Nobody would have known the difference. His voice was very quiet now, almost gentle. Eleanor would have hated seeing me feel sorry for myself somewhere like that, so I just stopped going. Jack sat in his truck for a long time after the call ended. Some wounds are not caused by cruelty. Some are caused simply by indifference, by the slow and careless accumulation of moments where nobody looked. And those wounds, Jack understood now, were often the ones that took the longest to heal. 2 weeks later, on an early Monday morning, before the café had opened its doors, every employee from the original location stood waiting without knowing why. Jack walked in through the front with Rex beside him. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform anger. He walked to the front of the room, placed 31 printed reviews on the nearest table, and began to speak. He talked about what the reviews said. He talked about his undercover visits and what he had seen and heard with his own eyes and ears. He talked about Emily's recipes and whose name had been on them for 3 years. He talked about the complaints that had never reached the people they were meant to reach. And then he talked about Walter Hayes, about Eleanor, about 6 years of Tuesday mornings and a vanilla latte, and an old man who had finally stopped coming because nobody in this room had ever bothered to learn his name. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. The room was completely still, except for Rex shifting quietly at Jack's feet. 3 managers were dismissed before the morning was over. 2 others received formal action. It was hard and necessary, and nobody present would forget it. Then Jack looked toward the back of the room. Emily was standing near the wall, very still, hands folded in front of her. She had the expression of someone waiting to receive one more difficult piece of news, someone who had learned not to expect anything different. "Emily," Jack said. She looked up slowly. "3 of our best-selling drinks were yours." His voice was calm and unhurried. "The Harvest Blend, the Winter Vanilla Roast, the Summer Cold Brew." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "You built something real for this company, and you never once received credit for any of it." Her chin dropped slightly. She blinked once. "That changes today," Jack said quietly. The tears came before she could stop them. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and tilted her face briefly upward the way people do when something has broken open inside them that they have been holding closed for a very long time. Rex stood and walked to her, slowly and calmly the way he always moved. He sat down beside her and leaned his full weight gently against her leg. She dropped her hand to his head, and she let herself cry. In the months that followed, Freedom Grounds changed in ways that only some of it could be measured. Emily was promoted to Regional Innovation Director. Her name appeared on every drink she had created. New leadership training built genuine kindness and accountability into its foundation, rather than treating them as optional. Every original recipe on the menu now carried its creator's name beside it. Customer satisfaction climbed steadily, but the number that mattered most to Jack had never appeared on any report. It was the feeling people described when they walked through the door now, that they were expected, that someone was glad they had come. 1 year later, on the anniversary morning, the original Freedom Grounds was full. Families at the wide tables near the window, veterans near the fireplace in the corner, students with open books, children who kept sliding off their chairs and climbing back up laughing. The smell of fresh coffee and something baking, and the low, warm sound of a room full of people who had nowhere they needed to rush to. Emily was behind the counter. She moved differently now, shoulders back, eyes easy. The smile that had once appeared and disappeared depending on whether anyone was watching now simply stayed because it was real. The door opened and a cold breath of morning air came in with it. Walter Hayes stepped inside. He stood for a moment in the doorway, adjusting to the warmth, looking around the room with the careful expression of a man who has been disappointed enough times to keep his expectations modest. His coat was buttoned to the collar. His hands were in his pockets. He looked older than Jack remembered, and smaller somehow, the way grief makes people look when it has been living with them long enough.
Emily looked up from the counter. "Good morning, Walter," she said. His eyes found her. Stop. Before he could say a single word, she added quietly, "Vanilla latte, extra hot." Walter Hayes stood completely still for just a moment, and then he laughed. A full, unguarded, unself-conscious laugh that rose up from somewhere deep inside him that he hadn't visited in a long time. He shook his head slowly and walked toward the counter, and something in the set of his shoulders was entirely different from what it had been in the doorway. Something had lifted. Something he had carried so long he had stopped noticing its weight. Across the room, Rex lifted his head from his paws. His tail moved once, then again, slow and steady. Jack stood near the back wall with a cup of coffee in his hand. Nobody recognized him. Nobody needed to, because the room around him was no longer simply a reflection of the company he had spent 19 years building. It was a reflection of the reason he had built it, the belief he had carried home from 21 years of service, the words on the sign above the counter that he could finally read without looking away.
He took a slow sip of his coffee, looked up one last time. Everyone has a place here. This time, without any question, he believed it. This story carries a truth that takes years of living to fully understand, that the people who contribute the most are very often the ones whose contributions go unseen the longest. Emily Carter never stopped showing up. She never demanded recognition or made her sacrifices visible or asked anyone to notice what she was quietly carrying, both at work and at home. She simply kept doing the work with honesty and care, even when the people around her took credit for what she had built. Her story is a reminder that integrity is not diminished by being ignored. It remains fully intact whether anyone acknowledges it or not. And in the right hands and at the right moment, it is always, eventually, recognized. The story also speaks an honest truth about how the culture of any organization can drift silently away from its founding values when the people at the top stop looking closely. Jack built Freedom Grounds on a belief that everyone deserves to feel genuinely seen
and welcomed. But growth created distance, and distance allowed indifference and small daily cruelties to take root without anyone above them ever noticing. That is a lesson for anyone who leads or builds or is responsible for other people. Values require active and constant tending. They do not maintain themselves simply because they were once sincerely meant. Walter Hayes represents something achingly familiar to older viewers. The particular and quiet grief of losing a lifelong partner and trying to hold on to the small routines that once belonged to both of you. His story is told without sentiment, but with complete honesty. He was never turned away directly. He was simply made to feel, through the slow accumulation of moments where nobody looked, that his presence was an inconvenience. That kind of invisible exclusion causes real and lasting harm, especially to people already carrying loss. His return on that anniversary morning, and the moment Emily speaks his name and remembers his order without being asked, is not a small or incidental gesture. For a man who had quietly stopped believing that anyone noticed whether he came or went, it was simply everything. Rex, throughout this story, models something that human beings so often struggle to practice: the ability to see past appearance and status and surface impression and find where genuine need and genuine worth actually live. He does not seek out the most important or most powerful person in the room. He finds the most burdened one. That instinct, so effortless in the dog and so frequently absent in people, is the quiet moral heart of everything this story is trying to say. And the story affirms, finally, that it is never too late to correct what has gone wrong. Jack could have responded to 31 reviews from behind a desk. He could have sent instructions down through layers of management and called it handled. Instead, he put on old clothes and rode a city bus and stood at his own counter and let himself be ignored and listened and looked directly at a truth that was painful and then acted on it without hesitation or excuse. That willingness to see clearly and respond with both accountability and genuine human warmth is a kind of courage that does not require a uniform to be real. It only requires the belief, stubborn and unshakable, that people matter, that nobody should be left behind, that everyone, without exception, has a place.